That fence is going where the community says it goes, Mr. Hale, and your opinion about your own property line is frankly irrelevant. The woman who said that was Brenda Castle, president of the Pinewater Ridge Homeowners Association for 11 years running. And she said it to my face on a Tuesday morning while two men she had hired drove survey stakes into ground that had belonged to my family since before her subdivision had a name. The land was 8 feet of pasture along my eastern fence, a strip you could cross in 3 steps, and she wanted it for the road her husband's company was trying to push through the back of the ridge. What she did not know, standing there in her white sneakers on my gravel, was that I had spent 31 years flying aerial surveys for the state, that I had mapped half the county from 2,000 feet up, and that I had a folder of geo-referenced photographs of my own boundary going back further than her marriage. She thought she was arguing with a retired old man who would fold. She was arguing with a man who measures things for a living. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If someone moved your fence 8 feet onto land your grandfather cleared and smiled while they did it, what would you have done? My name is Walt Hale. I am 63 years old, and for most of my working life, I was a photogrammetrist, which is a long word that means I made maps out of photographs taken from aircraft. I would fly a fixed pattern over a stretch of county, capture overlapping images, and stitch them into precise scaled drawings that told you exactly where a thing sat on the surface of the earth, down to inches. Roads, rivers, property lines, floodplains. If the county needed to know where something was, my photographs answered the question, and they did not argue back. I retired 4 years ago to the place I grew up, 40 acres of pasture and pine on the eastern slope of the ridge. The same 40 acres my grandfather fenced by hand in 1941. My wife, Carol, is buried at the top of that pasture under a single oak, where she asked to be. She died 2 springs before I came home for good, a long, slow illness that gave us time to say things most people never get to say. And the last promise I made her, sitting beside her bed with her hand in both of mine, was that I would keep the land whole and give it to our girl clean, with no fights and no liens, and nothing crooked about it. She knew the family history of that strip better than I did. She had heard my grandfather tell it on the porch a dozen times before he passed. The story of the line he and old man Coley walked. And she used to say the land was the only thing we owned that would outlast all of us. So we had better keep its papers in order. I did not understand then how literal she was being. Our daughter Maddie was 15 when I moved back. She's 17 now, tall and quiet and sharper than I was at her age, and she lives with me in the cabin my grandfather raised. She took her mother's death hard, and the land became a kind of medicine for her the way it had been for me. She learned to drive the old tractor in the lower pasture. She named the calves we did not keep. She is the reason I keep the records I keep, because a man with nothing to lose can afford to lose his temper, and a man raising a daughter alone on inherited ground cannot. She is the reason I did not raise my voice the day Brenda Castle put stakes in my pasture, when every nerve I had was telling me to. I had a witness who mattered watching how I handled it, and I wanted her to learn that you win these things on paper, not with your fists or your lungs. I should explain the strip of land, because everything turns on it. My eastern fence runs along the boundary between my 40 acres and the Pinewater Ridge subdivision, which went up in the 90s on what used to be the Coley farm. The recorded plat for that subdivision, the official map filed at the county, draws its western edge 8 feet east of my fence. There is a reason for that gap. My grandfather and old man Coley walked the line together in 1941 and agreed the fence would sit 8 feet inside my side of the true boundary, so that Coley could run a cattle lane along the edge without crowding the wire. The fence has stood in that spot for more than 80 years. The true line, the legal line, is 8 feet east of it. That strip of 8 feet has always been mine. It is on every map I ever flew. It is on the recorded plat. It is on the deed. Brenda Castle did not read any of those documents. That was her whole problem, start to finish. She looked at my old fence, decided it was the boundary because it looked like one, and built an entire campaign on a guess she never checked. I met her the first autumn I was home. I was mending a section of the eastern fence, splicing new wire onto an old post, when a golf cart came humming up the subdivision side of the line and stopped on the manicured grass that ended where my pasture began. A woman stepped out in a linen blazer and pearls and white sneakers that had never seen mud, and she walked toward me across the grass like she was inspecting a property she already owned. Clipboard against her hip. She introduced herself as Brenda Castle, president of the Pinewater Ridge Homeowners Association. And she said it the way some people say a military rank. She told me, pleasant as a church greeter, that my fence was an eyesore that lowered everyone's home values, and that the board would appreciate it if I replaced the old wire with the approved vinyl panel within 60 days. I set down my pliers and told her the fence was 80 years old, stood on my own land, and was not subject to her board. I was polite. I had no reason not to be. She smiled and tilted her head the way you do at a slow child. And she said the ridge was a planned community now, and that my parcel was functionally part of the community, whether the paperwork had caught up or not. Functionally part of the community. I wrote that phrase down that night on a legal pad, with the date and the time and a note that she had been wearing pearls to walk a cattle pasture. Because 31 years of flying surveys had taught me that the things people say casually in the moment are the things they later swear they never said. That legal pad became the first page of a folder I would label and keep for 2 years. I want to be plain about the folder, because it is the hero of this story more than I am. I bought a single accordion folder at the drugstore and labeled the tab with one word, boundary. Every time Brenda Castle or her board sent a letter, I 3-hole punched it and filed it by date. Every time I had a conversation with her at the fence, I came inside and wrote down the day, the time, the words, and what she was wearing. Because detail is what makes a record believable later. I kept my old flight maps in there too, the scaled aerial drawings of my own property that I had pulled from the state archive when I retired. The ones that showed the true boundary, 8 feet east of the fence, as clear as a chalk line. I did not know yet what the folder was for. I just kept it, the way I have always kept records, because a thing you cannot prove is a thing you do not really own. The first formal escalation came the following spring. A letter arrived on association letterhead informing me that the board had voted to assess me a fine of $200 for the non-compliant fence, with the fine recurring monthly until I brought the structure into conformity with community standards. I filed the letter. I did not pay it. I wrote a single short reply stating that my property was not a member parcel of the association, that I had never signed a covenant, and that the fence stood on my own deeded land. I kept a copy of my reply in the folder. That was Incident 1, and I numbered it in the corner with a pencil. 1. By summer, the fines had stacked to 4 months, and the letters had grown teeth. They now mentioned a lien. A lien is a legal claim against your property for an unpaid debt, and the threat of one is supposed to frighten you into paying. I was not frightened, because you cannot line a property for violating rules it was never bound by. But I understood the letter was meant to build a paper trail that made me look like a delinquent neighbor who refused to pay his fair dues. So I built my own trail to put beside theirs. I drove the 20 minutes into town to the county recorder's office, paid the small fee, and pulled a certified copy of the recorded plat for Pinewater Ridge, the subdivision's own official map filed when the development went in. I spread it on the hood of my truck in the parking lot before I even drove home, because I could not wait. And there it was in the developer's own ink, the western boundary of the subdivision drawn 8 feet east of my fence line, with the monument callouts and the surveyor's seal. Their own map agreed with my grandfather, with my deed, with every flight I had ever flown over that ridge. I filed the certified plat in the folder behind my aerial drawings. Incident 2. The fines kept coming. I kept filing, and I stopped feeling them, the way you stop feeling a dog that barks at you every day. That autumn, I met the deputy. His name was Russ Tovar, a county sheriff's deputy about 40, built like a man who had played ball in high school and kept most of it. And he came up my drive one afternoon because Brenda had called in a complaint that I was harassing her board members. I had not spoken to a board member in months. I met him in the yard with my hands open and offered him coffee, and we sat on the tailgate while he wrote his notes. Russ was polite and tired in the way of a man who spends his days refereeing neighbors who have known each other too long. He explained something to me that I have never forgotten, and that I will pass to you before this is over. He said that when a complaint is filed, he has to act on it, regardless of whether it has merit, because that is the job when the law gives him no room to skip it. He cannot stand in a driveway and decide on the spot who is right. What he can do, he said, is read what people put in front of him later. He told me that if I kept a clean documented record, every letter, every date, every fine, every word spoken at the fence, and if the day came that this went in front of a judge or a board or a county panel, the record would do the talking and I would not have to say a word in my own defense. Build the file, he said. Make it boring and make it complete and date everything. A pattern on paper beats a story told out loud every time. Then he tipped his hat to Maddie, who was watching from the porch with the dog, and he drove off slow down the gravel. I went inside and wrote down the date and every word he had said. Incident 3. The first ally signal, though I did not have a name for it yet. There was a 4th incident I have not told you about yet, and it belongs here because it is the one that made me start saving everything twice. Late that winter, Brenda widened the attack past me and went after the one thing on my land that brought in money. I leased the lower pasture to Cole Briggs for grazing in the warm months, a handshake deal his father had with my grandfather before us. A letter went out from the association on letterhead to Cole, informing him that running livestock on a parcel under active code dispute exposed him to liability and to fines as a contributing party. It was nonsense. Cole was not a member of anything either. It was meant to scare an honest rancher off doing business with me and dry me out slow. Cole drove over the next morning and put the letter on my kitchen table and said, "Walt, I have known this fence since I was a boy. You just tell me where the line is and I will run cattle right up to it." I told him 8 feet east of the wire, where it has always been. He shook my hand and tore the letter in half, and I taped the 2 halves back together and filed it, because even a torn threat is evidence. Incident 4. That was the day I started backing the folder up to a second drive. I should tell you about the husband, because the strip of land never made sense until I understood him. Brenda's husband was Gary Castle, and Gary Castle owned a development company that was trying to extend a road through the back of the ridge to open a new section of lots on the far slope. I learned this the slow way, the way you learn most true things, in pieces over months. A rancher 2 miles over, a man named Cole Briggs, who had bought hay from my grandfather and now bought it from me, mentioned it over a handshake while we loaded square bales into his trailer. He said Gary's crew had been seen surveying the old logging cut behind the subdivision, and that the word around the feed store was that the new road needed a wider easement on its western edge to meet the county's setback rules. Cole spat and said the only way to get that width without buying expensive frontage was to move the line, to move it onto somebody else's 8 feet. He looked at my fence when he said it, and then he looked at me, and neither of us had to finish the thought. I went home and laid the county road maps next to my flight drawings on the kitchen table. And Maddie cleared her homework to the side and sat across from me under the lamp while I traced the geometry with my finger. The proposed road ran along the back slope and turned to meet the existing subdivision road right at my eastern boundary. To make the turn legal under the county's setback rule, the western easement had to sit a certain distance off the center line, and there was not enough room between the road and the true boundary unless the boundary moved east onto my pasture, exactly 8 feet of it. I measured it twice to be sure. My 8 feet was not an eyesore Brenda wanted gone. My 8 feet was the difference between her husband's road getting permitted and dying on the drawing board. The fence fight was a land grab, dressed up as a homeowner's dispute. And the woman in the pearls was the front of it. Maddie looked at the 2 maps lined up and said, "So she does not even care about the fence." And I told her no, she cares about the road. The fence is just the thing she can yell about in a driveway without saying the word road out loud. That changed how I kept the folder. I started saving everything to 2 drives, the way I used to back up flight data, because data that exists in only one place does not really exist. I photographed the fence line from the ground at the 4 corners with the timestamp on. Then again, from the top of the pasture so the whole line showed. I pulled the county filings for Gary's proposed road and printed the page that showed the required easement width and the setback rule. And I highlighted the number with a yellow marker. Then I called an old colleague from my flying days, a licensed surveyor named Priya Anand, who had checked and certified my maps for the state for 15 years before we both retired. We had spent a lot of cold mornings on tarmacs together. I trusted her reading of a line more than I trusted my own. I asked her one question. If I needed to prove, beyond any argument a lawyer could make, where the true boundary sat, could a current survey tied to my old aerial control do it? She was quiet a second, and then she said yes. She said better than yes. She said if I still had my geo-referenced flight imagery in the archive, she could fly a fresh drone capture over the strip and overlay it on the old control, and show the fence and the true line, and anything anyone had staked in between. All in the same scaled frame, certified under her seal, and no board on earth could wave it away. I told her to hold that thought. I was not ready to spend the money or fire the shot. I had learned a long time ago that you do not show your strongest evidence until the other side has committed all the way to the position it cannot back out of. I wanted Brenda fully on the record. So I waited and I filed, and the fines climbed past $1,000 while I said nothing. The next spring is when it turned ugly, and I will tell it the way it happened. On a Monday in April, a flatbed delivered 4 pallets of vinyl fencing to the subdivision side of my boundary. The bright white panels stacked and shrink-wrapped, like they were already mine to refuse. By Tuesday morning, a 2-man crew was out in the dew driving survey stakes into my pasture 8 feet west of my fence, which is to say onto the true line and past it, claiming my strip for the road easement. That is the Tuesday I opened on. I walked down from the cabin with my coffee still in my hand, and Brenda was standing on my gravel in her white sneakers directing the crew like a foreman. And when she saw me, she did not back up an inch. She told me my opinion about my own property line was frankly irrelevant, that the community had voted, and that the new fence would go in along the staked line whether I liked it or not. She said it loud enough that the crew stopped to listen, because the performance was the whole point. She wanted them to see the old man fold. I did not argue with her. I have learned that arguing with a person like Brenda Castle is how you become the story instead of the victim, and I had no intention of being the story. I set my coffee on the post, and I walked the staked line with my phone, slow, photographing every stake against the fixed iron corner markers my grandfather had set in concrete. And I noted out loud, for the recording, the date and the time and the fact that the stakes sat a full 8 feet inside my deeded boundary, exactly where Gary's road needed them to sit. Brenda watched me do it and told the crew to keep working. I went back inside and I called Priya, and I told her it was time. Bring the drone Saturday. Then I opened the folder and wrote the entry, and I stopped numbering the incidents in pencil and started numbering them in ink. 5. The crew left at dusk. The stakes stayed in my grass like a row of little white flags planted on ground that was never theirs. Maddie was the one who said the word drone. She was doing homework at the table while I spread the photographs out, and she looked at the stakes in the pictures and looked at my old flight maps and said, "You used to do this from a plane, Dad. Why not just fly it?" She was right, and she had said in one sentence what I had been circling for 2 years. Priya did not need to walk the whole 40 acres with a transit and a week of field work. She needed one clean aerial capture, flown low and tied to the same control points my state imagery used, so the fence and the true boundary and Brenda's fresh stakes would all sit in one scaled photograph that the county's own survey software could read. I had flown 10,000 of these. I just had not flown one for myself. Priya came out the following Saturday with a survey-grade drone, the kind that records its own position to the centimeter against satellite control, not the toy kind you buy at a big box store. She set up her base station on my driveway off the corner monument and let it settle while we drank coffee on the tailgate and talked about the old days on the tarmac. Then we flew my eastern boundary in the cool of the morning, while the dew still held the grass down and the light came in low and flat from the east, which is the light you want for this. No hard shadows to hide a stake. Maddie ran the ground markers, laying the bright targets at the corner monuments where Priya pointed while I called the flight pattern from memory. The same overlapping passes I had flown 10,000 times from 2,000 feet up, only now from 40 feet and over my own grass. The dog, an old blue heeler named Scout, trotted the fence line below the drone like he was herding it. And once he sat down right on the true line and looked up at the thing buzzing overhead. And Maddie laughed for the first time in weeks. We captured the strip 3 times for the overlap that makes the math honest. Priya processed the imagery that night at my kitchen table and tied it to my archived state control. And what came out of her laptop the next morning was the cleanest piece of evidence I have ever held in my hand. It was a single-scaled aerial photograph of my eastern boundary, looking straight down. On it, in geo-reference truth, sat my 80-year-old fence, the true deeded boundary, 8 feet to its east, drawn as a fine red line, and Brenda Castle's fresh survey stakes, driven a full 8 feet west of the true line, deep into my pasture. The road easement she had staked did not clip the corner of my boundary. It swallowed 8 feet of it whole, the entire width, the exact width Gary's road needed. The picture did in one frame what 2 years of letters could not do in 100 pages. Priya stamped it with her license number and signed and dated it across the corner. I had my shot loaded. I did not fire it yet. Because the same week, Brenda made the mistake that turned a property dispute into something the county could not ignore. Her crew came back on a Thursday while I was at the feed store in town. They cut my fence. They cut the 80-year-old wire my grandfather strung by hand in 1941, snipped it at the posts and rolled it back in coils, and began setting holes for the vinyl panel along the staked line 8 feet inside my land. Maddie saw them from the porch and called me, and her voice came through the truck speaker in pieces, the way a person talks when they are scared and trying not to be. "Dad, they cut it. They cut Granddad's fence. There is a man with a post driver in the pasture, and Brenda is in the golf cart pointing. I told her to stay on the porch, do not go down there, do not say a word to them. Just film it from the steps and keep Scout up there with you." She did exactly that. She filmed 4 steady minutes of a hired crew destroying and hauling off a lawful boundary fence and trespassing onto deeded land to set a structure that served a private road project, with the president of the Homeowners Association standing right there directing it. I called Russ Tovar from the cab before I even pulled out of the lot, and I drove home faster than I should have. By the time I got there, the deputy's cruiser was already in my drive, lights turning slow, and Russ was standing in the gap of my cut fence with his hand up, telling the crew to set down their tools and step back onto the subdivision side. He had already watched Maddie's video on her phone. He had the scene in front of him. The rolled wire, the fresh holes, the stakes. He looked at me as I came up and he said, "Walt, this is not a homeowner's matter anymore. Somebody destroyed property and crossed a line onto your deed. And I am going to need everything you have got, all of it, today." I told him to wait right there. I went inside and brought out the folder. That folder had 2 years in it. Every letter, every fine, every date, the certified plat, my flight maps, the photographs of the stakes, and now Priya's signed aerial overlay. Russ read it on my tailgate for 20 minutes. Slow, the way you read something you are going to have to swear to later. When he got to Priya's drone photograph, he stopped. He laid it flat and put his finger on the true line, then on the stakes, then on the cut fence, and he said one word: 8. 8 feet. He looked up at me, and I watched the whole thing reorganize behind his eyes, the complaints, the fines, the call about harassment, all of it flipping over to show its underside. Then he asked the question that ended it. He asked who benefited from the line moving east. I handed him the county filing for Gary Castle's road and the page that showed the easement width. And Russ went quiet in the way a man goes quiet when he realizes he's been used as a tool in somebody else's scheme. The county scheduled a hearing because Gary's road needed a variance, and the variance was already on the calendar. And the destruction of my fence had drawn the kind of attention that put the whole Ridge project under a light. The hearing was held in the county planning chamber on a Thursday morning, and the room was full. Brenda was there in a magenta blazer with the association's lawyer beside her. And Gary was there in a sport coat with the look of a man who had never once expected to be in this room. The neighbors were there, the ones who had been told for 2 years that I was the difficult old man lowering their home values. Maddie sat in the front row with the folder on her lap. I had asked her to hold it. I wanted her hands on it when it mattered. Brenda spoke first, because she always did. She told the panel that the association had acted to correct a long-standing boundary encroachment, that my fence had sat unlawfully on community land for decades, and that the new fence simply restored the true line. She said my parcel was functionally part of the Ridge and always had been. Functionally part of the Ridge. The third time I heard her say it, and the last. She sat down satisfied. Her lawyer slid a folder of fine notices to the clerk as if a stack of unpaid penalties proved anything except that she had sent a lot of letters. Then the chairman asked if the property owner wished to respond, and I stood up and asked Priya Anand to bring the photograph. She walked to the front in a plain jacket with a tube under her arm, and she laid a single large print on the document camera, and the screen at the head of the room filled with my eastern boundary seen from straight above, scaled and stamped and signed in the corner. She spoke for 90 seconds in the flat, unbothered voice of a licensed surveyor reading coordinates off a sheet. She showed the recorded monuments, the iron pins set in concrete, and pointed out that each one was logged at the county by its own coordinate. She showed my fence. She showed the true deeded line 8 feet east of the fence, and she set the certified plat from the 90s beside her photograph so the room could see the two agreed to the inch. And then she showed Brenda Castle's survey stakes and the line of fresh fence post holes driven 8 feet west of the true boundary, a full 8 feet inside my deeded land. the exact strip the road easement required. She did not raise her voice. She did not say a hard word about anyone. She put the tip of a pen on the true line and the tip of another pen on the stakes, and she said, "The measured distance between these 2 points is 8 feet. And every monument in this image is recorded at the county and tied to state control." Then she capped her pens and stepped back from the screen and folded her hands. The room was very quiet. The chairman leaned forward and looked at the screen for a long moment, then looked at the recorded plat the clerk had pulled, then looked at Brenda. He asked the association's lawyer a single question. He asked whether the association had obtained a current survey before assessing fines and ordering the fence moved. The lawyer said the association had relied on the historical fence as the boundary. The chairman said, "A fence is not a survey." He said it the way you would correct a child who had guessed. He read the recorded plat aloud. The western boundary of Pinewater Ridge fixed 8 feet east of the Hale fence, filed in 1993 by the subdivision's own developer. And he noted for the record that the document was over 30 years old and bore the signature of the same family now sitting in front of him seeking the road variance. He set the contrast on the table where everyone in that chamber could see it plainly. On my side of the ledger, 0 fines lawfully owed, a boundary fixed in writing for more than 80 years, a recorded plat, and an aerial survey tied to state control and signed by a licensed professional. On hers, $11,000 in fines, assessed against a parcel that was never bound by her covenants. 1 boundary fence destroyed, 4 pallets of vinyl that would never be set. 1 count of criminal trespass now referred to the sheriff, and a road that could not be built. 2 columns, 1 short and clean, 1 long and crooked, and the 8 feet sitting at the center of both, like the hinge of a door. Because that was the part Gary Castle understood last and worst. The chairman turned to the variance for the road, the reason the hearing existed at all, and he denied it. The road required the western easement to sit where Brenda's stakes were driven, 8 feet inside my land, and that land was not hers to grant and never had been. Without those 8 feet, the easement failed the county's own setback rule, and the project that had driven the entire 2-year campaign died in a single sentence at the front of that chamber. She had moved the line to build the road. The proof that the line never moved was the thing that killed the road. The flood she meant to send across my pasture fell instead on her own development. I did not say a word at that hearing except to ask Priya to bring the photograph. I never told Brenda she was wrong, not at the fence, not in the driveway, not in that chamber. I never said one version of "I told you so" the way you might want to after 2 years of letters. The picture said it. The plat said it. The chairman said it for me, plainly, into the record. I just stood next to my daughter while the documents did the talking, the way Russ Tovar told me they would 2 years before on my own gravel drive, when he sat on my tailgate and told me to build the file and make it boring. There was a consequence, and it was the kind that fits the crime. The criminal trespass referral went forward to the district attorney, and the association, on the advice of a lawyer who could finally read the same plat the chairman had read aloud, settled a civil claim for the destroyed fence and the years of unlawful fines rather than face a jury with that aerial photograph on a screen. The dollar figure was large enough that Pinewater Ridge had to special assess its own members to cover it, which meant every neighbor who had spent 2 years being told I was the difficult old man lowering their home values opened a bill that told them exactly who had cost them the money. And it was not me. Brenda Castle did not run for association president again the following year. Gary's company quietly folded the Ridge expansion, because a road that cannot meet setback without land it does not own is not a road. It is a lawsuit, and he sold the back slope at a loss to a buyer who had no use for the 8 feet. None of that was my doing. I never sought $1 of it or a day of anyone's trouble. It was the plain automatic weight of their own actions rolling back down the slope they had tried to send it up. The thing I remember most from after is not the hearing. It is the Saturday we restrung the fence. Cole Briggs came over with his 2 grown sons and a spool of new wire, and Russ Tovar came in jeans and a ball cap on his day off. No badge, just a neighbor with a post hole digger. And the 4 of us and the boys pulled fresh wire along the same 80-year-old line my grandfather and old man Coley walked in 1941, 8 feet west of the true boundary. Exactly where it had always stood and always will. Maddie set the corner posts plumb the way I taught her, tamping the dirt with the back of a shovel, and Scout supervised from the shade of the truck. We did not talk much. There was not much that needed saying. Cole stretched the wire, and I clipped it, and the line came up straight and tight in the afternoon sun. The ugly old kind of fence that lowers nobody's home values and means everything to the people who built it. At the top of the pasture, under the single oak, Carol's headstone caught the low gold light, and when the others packed up, I walked up there alone and stood a minute with my hand on the gatepost and told her the land was whole and clean, the way I promised her it would be. Every foot of it. The 8 feet beyond the wire, too. So here is what I want you to take from this. Plainly, because it is worth more than the story. Your fence is not your boundary. Your boundary is whatever the recorded plat and your deeds say it is, and the two are not always the same. And the gap between them is exactly where someone will try to take from you. Go to the county recorder and pull the certified plat for your own land and the parcels that touch it. Read it. Find your monuments, the iron pins and the marked corners, and walk them with your own feet so you know where the real line sits. If you do not know where it is, hire a licensed surveyor once and find out, because that one bill is cheaper than 2 years of fines and a destroyed fence. Keep a folder. Label it. Put every letter and every date in it, and write down what people say to you while you still remember the words. Back it up to a second place. And if you ever doubt that calm and paper can beat a clipboard and a loud voice, remember that 8 feet of pasture in mountain country was decided not by who shouted in the driveway, but by a single photograph that told the truth from 2,000 feet up. If you have a story like this one, a boundary, a board, a fight you won or lost over a line on the ground, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of people who are in the middle of their own version right now. Subscribe if you want more of these, told straight and told true. And next time, I will tell you about the widow up the valley whose HOA tried to bill her for the private well her husband drilled 40 years before their subdivision existed, and what she found in the original water filing that ended it in one afternoon. Take care of your records. They will take care of you.